When my son-in-law opened the door at Christmas dinner and saw me standing on the step with the tourtière still warm in my hands, he said, "Sorry, the table's full this year. Maybe next time." Then he closed it. I drove home through the snow, called my notary the next morning, and took my son's name off everything. 3 weeks later, he found out. "Good evening, my friends. It's Carol again, and I'm so glad you've come to sit with me tonight. Before I begin, do me a small kindness. Leave a like and tell me in the comments which town or city you're listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel, all the way from my little kitchen in the Ottawa Valley out to wherever you are. Pour yourself a tea. Let me tell you what happened. I'm 71 years old. I was born in a farmhouse near Renfrew, raised on potatoes and patience, and I spent 38 years teaching grade 4 at the same school where I once sat as a girl. My husband, Walter, drove a snowplow for the township for most of his life, and when the cancer took him 4 winters ago, I thought the cold had come inside the house to stay. We had one child, a boy. I won't pretend I loved him less for being our only one. If anything, I loved him too much, the way you do when there's nothing to divide your heart between. His name doesn't matter as much as what he meant to me. I'll just call him my son, because for most of my life that word held everything. After Walter passed, my son and his wife became the whole shape of my days. I'd drive the 40 minutes into Kanata every Sunday with a roast or a pot of soup, and I'd sit at their table and watch my 2 grandchildren grow. A little girl with her grandfather's stubborn chin, and a boy who at 3 years old could already name every plow truck in the township by color. I helped them in every way I knew how. When they wanted to move out of the rental and into a real house, I took $20,000 out of the savings Walter and I had built one frostbitten paycheck at a time, and I handed it over for the down payment without a second thought. When my son's truck packed it in 2 winters ago, I co-signed for the new one. When my daughter-in-law decided the children should be in the French immersion daycare across town, the one that cost more per month than my first car cost in total, I quietly covered it. That's what you do, isn't it? You don't keep a ledger on your own family. You give while your hands still work. But somewhere over the last 6 or 7 months, the warmth started leaking out of things. The Sunday dinners got canceled, a hockey tournament, a birthday party, a renovation. My phone calls went to voicemail and came back hours later as a single line of text. Busy, talk soon. When I asked about the grandchildren, my daughter-in-law would answer in that bright, brittle voice people use when they want you off the phone. I told myself it was just the season. Young families run hard. I remembered those years myself, hauling Walter's lunch out to the truck and a toddler on my hip at the same time. But there was a stone sitting in my stomach that wouldn't dissolve, no matter how much I told it to. The strange part is, I noticed the rhythm before I understood it. Every time the distance got too wide and I'd say something, gently, never a fight, they'd come close again for a little while. Warm again. "Mom, you're a lifesaver. We don't know what we'd do without you." And then, like clockwork, the warmth would fade right around the time the money cleared the bank. I didn't let myself see it. You don't want to see a thing like that about your own child. You'll twist yourself into knots to avoid it. 3 weeks before Christmas, I texted to ask what I should bring to dinner. I always brought the tertiaire. It was my mother's recipe, the same one I'd made every Christmas Eve since I was a young bride. The spices measured by memory and not by spoon. My daughter-in-law took 2 days to answer. "We'll let you know." 4 words, no warmth in them at all. I read that message standing at my kitchen counter while the kettle screamed behind me, and I felt something I couldn't name yet, something between shame and fear, as if I'd done something wrong, and nobody would tell me what. The day before Christmas Eve, my son finally called. Short, distracted. "Yeah, come around 6 on the 24th, that's fine." That fine should have warned me. But I'm a fool for hope, always have been. I spent the whole of the next morning in the kitchen. I made the tourtière with the good back bacon I'd driven into El Monte to buy. I wrapped the presents I'd been hiding in the spare room since October, a hockey jersey for my grandson, the colors of his favorite team, and a little music box for my granddaughter that played a song my own mother used to hum. I even bought my son a bottle of that rye whiskey he'd mentioned liking once, the kind that cost more than I'd ever spend on myself. I salted the front steps, warmed up the old Corolla, and drove into the city through a soft, forgiving snow, singing along to the carols on CBC. There were cars in the driveway I didn't recognize. Through the front window I could see lights, people moving. A tree lit up gold. My heart actually lifted at the sight of it. A full house, I thought. A real Christmas. I gathered up my dishes and my bags, and I went and rang the bell. It took a long time for the door to open. When it did, it was my son-in-law standing there, my daughter-in-law's brother, a man I'd met maybe 4 times at weddings and christenings. Behind him I could see the whole crowd, my daughter-in-law's parents, her sisters, people from my son's work, everyone in their good sweaters, everyone with a glass in their hand. Everyone, it seemed, but me. He looked at me the way you look at a salesman in January. "Carol," he said, "sorry, the table's full this year. We're keeping it just family." And he glanced over his shoulder into all that gold light, and something passed over his face that I can only call embarrassment for me, as if I were the one who'd done something foolish by showing up. I heard myself say, "But it's Christmas." My son told me 6 o'clock. "Maybe next time," he said, and then, gently, almost kindly, which was the worst part, he closed the door. I stood on that step, holding a tourtière that was still warm against my chest, and through the door I could hear my granddaughter laughing somewhere inside, and a Christmas song I didn't know playing too loud. The cold came up through the bottoms of my boots. I waited. I think I was waiting for the door to open again, for my son to come out, red-faced, saying, "Mom, my God, come in. There's been a mistake." But the door stayed shut. Nobody came. So I did the only thing I had left. I set the dishes and the bags down on the step carefully, the way you'd set down something sleeping. And I walked back to my car and I drove home through the snow, and I did not cry, because I think I was too far past it for that. I didn't sleep. I sat at my own kitchen table with the lights off and watched the snow come down under the street lamp. And I went back over the last 6 months like a teacher marking a test she should have caught the answers on long ago. The canceled Sundays, the texts, the way the money and the warmth rose and fell together like tides. By the time the light came gray over the backfields, I had stopped feeling sorry for myself and started feeling something colder and clearer. I got up. I made coffee. I didn't drink. And I went into the little room where Walter used to do the books. And I opened the filing cabinet where we kept everything that mattered. Our will was in there, the one we'd updated together the year before he died in his careful block printing on the envelope. Everything went to our son, the house free and clear, the investments, the little bit of life insurance. Walter's pension survivor benefit had built up more than I'd ever let myself spend. All told, near enough to $400,000, every cent of it earned in a township truck and a grade 4 classroom, set aside for a boy we believed would carry us forward. I sat with that envelope a long while. Walter used to tell me I was too soft. "Carol," he'd say, "you'd give the coat off your back to a man who picked your pocket." I always laughed him off. Now I sat in his chair and I understood what he'd been trying to warn me about, and I was sorry he wasn't here so I could tell him he'd been right. I called Francis Beaudry the day after Boxing Day. Francis had been our notary for 25 years, did our wills, handled things after Walter passed, knew us, back when the kids around here still walked to the rink. "Carol," she said when she heard my voice. How was your Christmas? I told her I needed to change my will and could she fit me in. There was a small silence on the line. Frances has known me too long not to hear what I wasn't saying. Come in Thursday morning, she said. Anne, dear, are you all right? No, I told her, but I'm going to be. Frances's office is over the hardware store on the main street, all the way up a flight of stairs that creak the same notes they did 20 years ago. She made me tea, and she sat across from me and said, "Tell me what happened." So I did. All of it, the door and the cold and the tertiaire on the step. She didn't gasp or fuss. She just listened the way good people listen, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "All right, what do you want to do?" "I want him out of it," I said. "Completely. The house, the savings, everything. I'd like it to go somewhere that does some good." She nodded slowly, the way you nod at a decision rather than an outburst. "You understand you can change this again," she said. Anger fades. I'd be doing you a poor service if I didn't say that out loud. I'm not angry, Frances. And I found when I said it that it was true. I'm finished. He let a man I barely know close a door in my face on Christmas Eve, and not one of them came out after me. I'm not punishing anybody. I'm just done paying for a seat at a table where I'm not welcome. So we did it. The house, sold or kept, the proceeds split between the Ottawa hospital where Walter spent his last months, the food bank in Renfrew County that fed half the families I taught over the years, and a literacy program for kids, because I was a teacher first and last. And there's no better way I can think of to be remembered. My son's name appears once in the new will in a single line that says he has been provided for during my lifetime and is to receive nothing further. Frances's assistant and the fellow from the insurance office downstairs came up to witness my signature. It took less than half an hour to undo what Walter and I had spent 40 years building. I drove home over the river feeling lighter than I had since the cancer first came. The call came 2 days into the new year. I was clearing the ice off the back steps when the phone rang in my coat pocket, and there was my son's name lighting up the screen. I let it ring a few times. Then I answered, "Mum." That voice, warm as a furnace, the way it only got when he wanted something. "Happy New Year, how are you keeping?" "Fine," I said. I kept chipping at the ice. "Listen, about Christmas, that was a real mix-up. The table situation, you know how Sarah's family gets. The numbers just..." He let it trail off, didn't even bother finishing the lie. Anyway, I wanted to run something by you. We've got a chance to buy into a franchise, a real opportunity, but we're short on the down payment. Just $25,000. We pay you back, obviously, with interest. It's a sure thing, Mum. There it was. 12 days after a stranger shut a door in my face on his doorstep, my son was on the phone asking me for $25,000. I almost laughed at the size of it. "No," I said. A pause. Then, carefully, "Sorry, what?" "No, I won't be lending you any more money. Not this, not anything." The warmth drained out of his voice so fast I could practically hear the cold rush in to fill it. "Are you serious? Mum, this is our future. This is for the kids. You've always helped us. What's gotten into you?" "What's gotten into me?" I said. And I set down the ice chipper because my hand was shaking, not with fear, but with something close to it. Is that I drove 40 minutes through the snow on Christmas Eve and was turned away at the door like a Jehovah's Witness, and then I drove home alone, and not one of you called. Oh my God, you're still on about that? It was a mix-up. Grow up, Mum. You're being dramatic. A mix-up. He'd reduced the whole thing to a clerical error, the way you'd shrug off a double-booked dentist. I understood, standing on my own back steps in the cold, that he genuinely did not believe he had done anything wrong. In his mind, I was the problem. Too sensitive, too needy, an old woman making a scene about a seating chart. "Goodbye," I said, and I hung up. He called back 3 times. Then the texts started. "You're being ridiculous. We're family. You can't just cut us off. Brad has the franchise paperwork ready. We need an answer by Friday." I read them, every one, standing in my kitchen with my coat still on, and then I put the phone face down on the counter and made myself a proper supper for the first time since the holiday. That week I did things I should have done years before. I called the credit union and took my son off as the beneficiary on my accounts. I called the insurance company and changed the policy. It had named him since the day he was born, and the woman on the phone read me the new wording in a flat, kind voice. And just like that, 38 years of being somebody's mother became a line on a form. I sat with my own bank statements at the kitchen table and added it up. All of it. The down payment and the truck and the daycare and the 100 small transfers in between. And it came to better than $70,000 over 2 years. The money never bothered me. What bothered me was seeing finally and clearly what it had bought, not love. A subscription, renewed monthly, canceled the instant the payment stopped. I did one more thing. On the advice of a woman at the credit union who'd seen this before, I made an appointment with a fee-only financial advisor in the city. A sensible woman named Priya, who didn't sell anything and didn't flinch when I told her the whole story. She went through my accounts and my pension, and she said, "Carol, you're in good shape, better than most. What was given is given, but there's no more going out the door without your say-so." She helped me move some things, set up accounts my son knew nothing about, and she made one point I hadn't thought of. "If anyone ever tries to claim you weren't in your right mind when you made these decisions," she said, "this paper trail is your proof. You're a clear-headed woman acting with professional advice. Hold on to that." I hadn't imagined I'd need protecting from a charge like that. I would within the month. I never did learn exactly how they found out about the will. Francis ran a careful office, so I suspect they simply put the pieces together. The refused loan, my silence, the changed beneficiary that turned up when my daughter-in-law called the insurer fishing. However it happened, on a gray Saturday in late January, a vehicle pulled into my drive that wasn't my son's truck, and out got my son and his wife, both of them with their coats half-buttoned and their faces already set hard. I opened the door, but I stayed in the doorway. I did not invite them in. "What did you do?" my son said. "No hello. We know you changed the will. We know you cut me out." "That's my right," I said. "That's Dad's money." His wife's voice climbed. "He worked his whole life for that. You can't just throw it away on, what, the food bank?" "Your father worked his whole life for us," I said. "And I'll do with our money what I think your father would want, which is not to hand it to a son who let his brother-in-law shut the door on me at Christmas." My son's jaw went tight. "You're not well, Mom. People your age, you're not thinking straight. This is exactly the kind of thing." "I'm 71, I said, "and I have a letter from a doctor and a binder of paperwork from an advisor that says I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years." "What do the two of you have?" His wife started to cry then. Real tears, or close enough. "Carol, please. We're sorry about Christmas. It got out of hand. Can't we fix this? The children miss you so much." And there it was. The children, brought out like the last card in a losing hand. I felt the old pull. God help me. I always will. But I'd seen this exact performance before. In the front hall when she wanted the daycare paid, on the phone when they wanted the truck. "If you missed me," I said, "one of you would have come out into the snow after me." Nobody did. I stood out there a long time. I'm not the one who forgot they had a mother. My son's face changed then into something I'd never seen on him before, something ugly. "You're going to die alone," he said. in some home with nobody, and it'll be your own doing. Better alone, I said, than at a table that only sets a place for me when the bill comes due. Don't come back. If you do, I'll call the detachment and tell them it's trespassing. I closed the door. I heard them arguing in the driveway, the truck doors slamming, the tires spinning on the ice. Then nothing but the furnace ticking and the snow against the glass. My hands shook for a long time, but not, I realized, from fear, from the strange, terrible relief of finally seeing a thing clearly and not looking away. The certified letter came in early February from a law firm in the city I'd never heard of. It used words like undue influence and diminished capacity and concern for Mrs. Whitfield's well-being. My son and his wife were challenging the will. They were going to try to have a judge declare that I was too old and too confused to know my own mind. I phoned Frances. "Don't panic," she said, and I could hear her reaching for her glasses. "This is a bluff. They want to frighten you into changing it back before it ever sees a courtroom. They have nothing. But it'll be unpleasant, Carol. I won't lie to you. They'll dig up every time you ever forgot a name or lost your keys and call it dementia. Are you ready for that?" I thought about my granddaughter's laugh on the other side of a closed door. I thought about the tourtière going cold on the step. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." Frances sent me to a geriatrician in Ottawa, a doctor, Okonkwo, who spent the better part of an afternoon with me, memory tests, conversation, questions about my finances and my reasons. At the end of it, she took off her glasses and said, "Mrs. Whitfield, in my professional opinion, you are entirely capable of managing your own affairs. Your reasoning is sound and your memory is frankly better than mine. Anyone telling a court otherwise is mistaken or dishonest." She wrote it all up in a report with her signature at the bottom, and I held on to it like a life raft. While they prepared their case, I prepared mine, though Frances did most of the work, and I just gathered the proof. I had the texts, the ones where my own son told me to grow up. I had the bank records, 2 years of them, every transfer dated and labeled in Walter's old careful way of keeping books that I'd kept up after him. I had Dr. Okonkwo's report and Priya's analysis showing every decision I'd made was sound and advised. And I had something I hadn't expected, a phone call one evening from my daughter-in-law's mother. Her name was Rosalind, and I'd met her 3 or 4 times. She had been in that gold-lit house on Christmas Eve. She was, by her own admission, one of the people who'd looked away. "Carol," she said, and her voice was unsteady. "I've been sick about this since Christmas. What they did to you, what they're doing now, dragging you into court. It's shameful. I told my daughter so to her face. If it would help, I'll say in front of a judge exactly what I saw at that door. I hadn't cried through any of it, not the door, not the letter, not the lawyer's office. I cried then quietly, with the phone pressed to my ear, because it turned out I wasn't quite as alone in the world as my son had promised me I'd be. I won't drag you through every gray week of waiting. What I'll tell you is that somewhere in the middle of it, I stopped living like a woman bracing for a blow and started living like a woman with years left in her. A neighbor talked me into the choir at the United Church, though I can't carry a tune in a pail. I started going Tuesday mornings to the library to read aloud to the little ones, and Thursday afternoons I drove out to the long-term care home in Arnprior and sat with the residents who had no one, read them the paper, held their hands, listened to their stories, gave them the very thing I'd been so afraid of losing myself, the proof that they still mattered. I signed up for a winter painting class at the Recenter and turned out to be gloriously, hopelessly bad at it. And I laughed at my own crooked pine trees in a way I hadn't laughed since before Walter got sick. The hearing was in March, in a small courtroom in Ottawa with radiators that clanked. My son and his wife sat with their slick young lawyer. I sat with Francis in the good navy suit I'd worn to Walter's funeral. Their lawyer went first, and he painted a sad picture. A confused, grieving widow, isolated and bitter, turned against her loving family by self-interested advisors. He put my daughter-in-law on the stand, and she wept and said she only wanted her mother-in-law back, that she didn't care about the money, not one bit. It was a fine performance. For a moment, even I half believed her. Then it was our turn. Francis laid it all out plainly. The text where my son called me dramatic and told me to grow up, the 2 years of bank records. The loan request for $25,000 dated 12 days after Christmas. Dr. Okonkwo testified that I was as sound of mind as anyone she'd examined. Priya explained that every decision I'd made was careful and professionally advised. And then Rosalind, my daughter-in-law's own mother, took the stand and told the court in a clear and shaking voice exactly what she had watched happen on that doorstep and how she had been ashamed of her silence ever since. Then I took the stand myself. Their lawyer tried to rattle me. "Mrs. Whitfield, isn't it true you were always rather controlling of your son's life?" "I was always there when he needed me," I said. "If being there is controlling, then I'm guilty. And you gave him a great deal of money over the years." "I did, which is why I expected to be let in the front door." "But you're punishing him now over one misunderstanding at a dinner." "No," I said. "I'm declining to keep paying for a family that only remembers me when the account is empty. There's a difference, though I understand it might be hard to bill for." The judge, a woman about my own age, with a face that gave nothing away, called a recess. When we came back, it took her about 2 minutes. "The evidence was clear," she said. Mrs. Whitfield was plainly competent to direct her own affairs. The will stood as written. The application was dismissed. I walked out of that courthouse into the cold March sunlight with my head high and Francis's arm in mine, and I did not look back at the two of them on the courthouse steps. I'd like to tell you I felt triumphant. Mostly, I felt tired and clean, the way you feel after you finally washed a window you'd been looking through dirty for years. The little local paper ran a few lines about it, and then someone put it online. And for a strange week or two, I had letters and messages from people all over. Strangers telling me their own stories of children who treated them like a bank machine and of the day they finally said no. I didn't gloat. There's no triumph in watching your own child show the world who they've become. My son and his family had a hard go of it after. Word travels in a place like this. The franchise fell through without my money. He took work he didn't want for less than he was used to. His marriage, I heard from Rosalind, started coming apart at the seams under the weight of the money they'd spent on a lawyer and the career he blamed her family for damaging. I felt no joy in any of it. I'd feel it still as a wound, I think, until the day I die, the loss of the boy I raised. But I never once felt that I had caused it. He built that house with his own hands. I only stopped paying the mortgage on it. And me, I bloomed, late and unlikely, like a geranium somebody finally moved into the light. By summer, my little house had become a place people came to. The choir ladies, the library volunteers, Rosalind and her husband, who turned out to be the kindest people, and who I think felt they had a debt to pay that they'd long since paid in full. I hosted dinners. I planted a garden that got away from me. I took a train trip clear across to the Rockies with 2 women from the choir, 3 old broads laughing in the dome car all the way to Jasper, and I stood looking up at a mountain so big it made my whole life feel like exactly the right size. I set up something for the grandchildren, too, because that's the part of all this that gnawed at me, and I'll wager it's gnawing at some of you. They didn't choose their parents. So I went back to Francis and we built a small trust. set aside for the two of them, for their education, with a condition it's held by Francis's firm and the bank, not by their mother and father, and not a cent of it passes through my son's hands. When my granddaughter is old enough to come knock on my door of her own free will, the door will open. I'll be here. I'd just rather she came for me than for the money, the way I always wished her father would have. This past Christmas, the second one since that closed door, I made the tourtière again, my mother's recipe, spices by memory. But this time my own kitchen was full. 11 of us crowded around a table built for 6, choir ladies and library friends and Rosalind in the good chair. The windows fogged with the heat of too many people and too much food. Somebody's grandchild asleep on the Chesterfield. I looked around that table and I understood something. It took me 71 years and one cold doorstep to learn. I'd spent my whole life believing that family was the people you were given. It isn't. Family is the people who get up out of their chairs and come out into the snow after you. So if you're sitting somewhere tonight wondering whether you're allowed to stop giving, stop bending, stop apologizing for taking up space at your own life, I want you to hear an old school teacher tell you plainly, you are. Blood doesn't buy you the right to be cruel to someone, and being someone's mother doesn't oblige you to be their doormat. You're allowed to keep your dignity. You're allowed to be loved properly or not at all. What would you have done, standing on that step in the cold? Tell me down below, and tell me where you're listening from, because I do love knowing how far this old voice carries. Mind how you go out there. And remember, the table you'll be happiest at is the one you set yourself. It still catches me sometimes, standing at the counter rolling out that tourtière pastry. How a closed door on Christmas Eve turned out to be the thing that handed me my own life back. For a long while, I blamed myself. I told myself that if I'd only given a little more, phoned a little less, made myself a little smaller, my son would have kept his arms open. But that's the lie that keeps a parent paying forever. The plainer, harder truth is that my son learned year after year that my love came with a checkbook stapled to it, and so he stopped reaching for me and reached for the account instead. That wasn't bad luck. It was the harvest of seeds I planted with the very best of intentions. Every loan that smoothed over a problem he ought to have solved himself. Every hard conversation I bought my way out of. Generosity without a backbone doesn't raise grateful children. It raises children who mistake their mother for a bank machine. What saved me wasn't anger. Anger's cheap, and it burns out fast. What saved me was finally letting myself see straight, sitting at Walter's old desk with 2 years of bank records spread in front of me, doing the arithmetic I'd been too frightened to do. The warmth rose and fell with the money, clear as a tide chart. Once I had the nerve to look. Seeing a thing honestly, even when it breaks your heart clean in two, is its own kind of clear-headedness. I'd spent 40 years being sharp about lesson plans and dull as a fence post about my own family. The day I let my mind work on my own life the way it worked on a grade 4 problem was the day the fear started loosening its grip. And then there was the standing. Anyone can make a brave decision in a notary's office at 10 in the morning. Holding it through a lawyer's letter, through my own son on my doorstep telling me I'd die alone, through a courtroom where a stranger in a good suit tried to convince a judge I'd lost my marbles. That took something I didn't know I owned until I had to spend it. I think you only find out what you're made of once the easy roads are closed. I found out I was made of more than casseroles and apologies. I don't say any of this to teach my son a lesson. I'd have him back tomorrow if he came as a man and not as an invoice. But doing right by myself was never the same as being hard. Doing right meant the trust for my grandchildren, held by Francis out of their parents' hands, so the innocent ones don't pay for the guilty. It meant letting Rosalind stand up and tell the truth she'd been ashamed to swallow. Decency and a spine aren't opposites, you see. You need the both of them, or the first one just makes you easy to rob. So be kind, but don't be a doormat about it. Use the good sense you were born with, even on the people you love, especially on them. And when your moment comes to stand, stand, even if you have to do it alone in the snow. You'll be surprised who comes out after you.